Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. If you haven't been here before, this channel is all about F1 fantasy, and usually I talk a bit more in depth about strategies, my team, etc. This is going to be a bit more of a short, concise video going through all of the changes to F1 fantasy in 2025 compared to 2024. Now, ideally, if the game had dropped last week, I would have made a well-edited video with proper, nice-looking slides. That's not going to be the case because I just don't have time to edit all of that. Instead, this is going to be I'm going to try and make this a one-cut video, but I'm going to leave in a couple of mistakes just in, I don't have time to edit all of these videos. I have 2 days to record. I'm in Melbourne. I'm going to be at the race or at Albert Park all weekend, Thursday through Sunday. So this is my chance. So let's go through all of the changes in F1 Fantasy 2025 and also a bit of what my opinion is on them.
Quick intermission before we get on with the actual video. I'm sure you know of F1 Fantasy Tools, right? You know, the one site I use in all of my videos, in all of my live streams, and, just best site for all F1 Fantasy stuff, looking at, optimal teams based on practice results, on just team builder, looking at past races and seeing all of the points and how many points each asset got, just on a quick one-page look without having to go through multiple menus and scrolling everywhere. That site, well, if you want to get access to their premium features, you can do so by using the link down below and using code RAIN50 at checkout for 50% off the first month of your subscription. It's like a coffee a month. It's a no-brainer if you are active in the F1 Fantasy community, and if you want to beat your friends in your mini leagues, you have to use F1 Fantasy Tools. I mean, it's the only place to be for F1 Fantasy. It is better than the F1 Fantasy site itself when it comes to showing data and showing how assets perform, in general. So if you're interested in getting the premium features on their website, use my code down below so you can let them know that I sent you there. Thank you so much. Let's get on with the video.
All right, so the first thing is this tab called What's New. It's on the F1 Fantasy website. I think a few of you have already seen it by now, where it says the new things here are the scoring updates and changes, the inactive drivers, price updates, and then over here on the right below, you can't really see me, it's off the screen, it just says a new look and feel. Now, the new look and feel, it looks great, but there's nothing to discuss really there. It looks good, right? I'm going to talk more about what impacts these changes have for the game. Initially, we can also skip the inactive driver part because this is not actually changed. What this inactive driver thing is now, it is the same change that they made midway through last season, meaning that if you have a driver who's not driving, they are not classified, meaning they get negative points instead of just getting 0. That's what that means, but it's the same. It's the change that happened after Logan Sargent was axed from Williams midway through the 2024 season. So that's actually not new if we compare it to the end of last year. But we have the scoring updates and changes, so let's look what those are. So there are 3 changes to point scoring in 2025 compared to 2024, 2 minor ones, 1 major one. Let's discuss the minor ones first. The first one is the first sort of paragraph here on the What's New page. If your driver competes in the sprint, but is replaced before Grand Prix qualifying, you'll get a transfer suggestion so you can avoid not classified penalties. What I just said about the new feature of not classified drivers, drivers that are inactive, getting those negative points, basically a DNF minus 20 point score. If you have a driver that raced in a sprint and then doesn't race in the race for some reason, someone is sick or whatever, you can now transfer them out between them. It will still cost a transfer to do so though. What this means is that you have your free transfers every week. You get 2, you can save 1, they become 3, and that's the most you can bank. The transfer to transfer out an inactive driver during a sprint, would come out of that pool. So if you have used your 2 free transfers and have no free transfers available, this transfer is going to cost you minus 10 points. Like you said here, this suggestion still comes out of your transfer limit. So really important. I would say if you end up in this situation sometime throughout the season, it is going to be worth it taking that minus 10 point penalty. The only time it wouldn't be worth it is if you transfer in a driver that then went on to DNF as well. Then that minus 10 point wouldn't be worth it. But other than that, it's almost always going to be worth taking out the inactive driver, because it's going to, that driver that is inactive is going to get a minus 20 score no matter what you do, right? So instead you take a minus 10. It feels like a no-brainer, but obviously if the new driver you're bringing also DNFs, it's a minus 30 instead of a minus 20. But, you know, there's not that many DNFs every single race, so I would say the risk is almost always worth it. This is not going to come up often, though. It's not often that a driver replaces a driver in just the sprint and then not in the main race. Usually, if a transfer like that were to happen, it's usually throughout an entire weekend. But in the off chance that this were to happen, this is a very good change. The second minor change is the disqualification penalties. Penalty points for being disqualified will now be applied to the constructor instead of the driver themselves. Disqualified drivers will not gain any points for the session they were disqualified from. So what does this mean? Well, previously, if a driver got disqualified, say George Russell in his win at Spa last year, when George Russell got disqualified, George Russell got minus 25 points for being disqualified. Then the Mercedes constructor gets the points for the drivers, and George Russell's points were minus 25, meaning that if you had Mercedes and George Russell in Spa, you got minus 50 points, minus 25 from a disqualification from George Russell and minus 25 from the Mercedes constructor through, you know, them acquiring George Russell's points. That's no longer the case. Now the driver will not be penalized for being disqualified, only the constructor. Now, if your driver gets disqualified, let's take George Russell as an example again in Spa, it's still going to hurt a lot, because obviously George Russell was the winner of that race before he was disqualified. So George Russell would have gained, what was it, something like 40 plus points in that race. That would have been brought down to 0 instead of 25. So whereas last season you would have lost 65 points from 40 down to minus 25, now you only lose 40 points. So you're still never happy when your driver gets disqualified. It's just not going to hurt as bad as it did before, which is nice. And now on to the major point scoring change of the year, the pit stops. Previously, the pit stops, the points for the fastest pit stop were handed out to the top 3 fastest pit stop times throughout the weekend. 10, 5, and 3 points. Meaning that if Ferrari had the 3 fastest pit stops of the race, Ferrari got an 18-point haul, grabbing both the 10, 5, and 3 points, and none of the other constructors got any points. Now, there's still a competition between the constructors, but it's more a competition against the clock. Each constructor will receive points for their individual fastest pit stop. And if we scroll down here on this page, you can see the actual points for this. It's going to be right down here at the bottom. So as you can see, if the fastest pit stop of a certain team is over 3.0 seconds, they gain no points. If it's 2.5 to 2.99, it's 2 points, then 5 points, 10 points, and 20 points. And then this disqualified thing is what we discussed previously. And then there is an additional 5 points awarded to the team which had the fastest pit stop. Now, this change is quite big, right? Now, it's very likely that most teams will receive some sort of reward for their pit stops throughout a race weekend. There's also this additional rule of a 15-point bonus awarded to a team that were to break the world record time for the fastest pit stop. That's not going to happen that often. When it does, it's going to be a cool thing, but it's not guaranteed to even happen across the entire season. Instead, what I want you to focus on is those 10 and 20 point jump. Under 2 seconds is not that common of a pit stop. I think it only happened 4 or 5 times last year, and most of them were by the top teams. 20 points for a pit stop is more than the 18 points you would have gotten from having 3 super fast pit stops. And now, obviously, this is not, if there's a team has 4 pit stops in one race that's above, below 2.0 seconds, they're not going to get 80 points. You only get the points for what your individual team's fastest pit stop time is. There are a bunch of implications to what this means compared to drivers. Are C-tier or budget constructors good now? How good will those expensive constructors be now? Are they going to, rack up 10, 20 points every single race? You can look at data from pit stops from last year. We're not going to do that in this video. If you want to see discussions of the sort, you can watch my weekend preview video that I posted earlier. I will link to that in the description, or you can just go to my channel, subscribe while you are there. This is all I'm going to discuss now. This is the actual change to the system. So we've talked about the look and feel of the game. We've talked about the inactive drivers. We've talked about the scoring updates and changes. What is this final category, the yellow one below me? Price updates. This is by far, and I mean by far, the biggest change to this season, and I'll explain why. There's no link to click on here. This below me is all that we get. All additional information that I have is from F1 Fantasy Tools Discord server, where a bunch of people have already figured out how some of this works. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, we don't know exactly how this new price change system works yet. And it's probably going to take 3 or 4 races before we are guaranteed to figure it out to 100% certainty. When that happens, I will of course make a full budget guide video. Subscribe so you don't miss that. It's going to be really important. But for now, what you need to know is this. Price recalculations and updates are now based on driver and constructor performances over the previous 3 Grand Prix. Now that looks well and good. It's like, okay, what does that mean exactly? If you know anything about how budget worked last year and price increases, that doesn't really make sense. And this is a very deceptive, short little description. This overhaul is massive. It changes everything. It's not just the fact that this change is a thing. Everything underlying, like the numbers, how much a driver can increase, the different driver ranges for what constitutes as a premium and a budget driver, all of that has changed. Let's try and go through what some of these changes that we know at this point in time are. So previously we had A, B, and C tier assets, and how much an asset increased or decreased in price depended on performance and which tier of driver or constructor they fell into. Previously it was 25 million or above was an A tier asset, 15 to 25 million was B tier, and below 15 million was a C tier asset. That looks to be gone now. We are quite sure, all of this, again, with a grain of salt, we don't know that 100% this is the case yet, but this is what we expect. We think that there's now only A and B tier assets. I'm still never going to get used to calling C tier assets B tier assets. It feels weird to call Kick Sauber a B tier asset, so I'm probably going to try and relearn it as premium and budget assets. We have these A and B tier assets. A tier assets are 20 million and above. B tier are below 20 million. And we have new select values for increases and decreases. So how much an asset increases or decreases in price is not like a range of, they can go from plus 0.1 million to plus 2.3 million in a race. That doesn't happen, okay? Previously, we had a max cap. A C-tier asset, for example, could increase 1.5 million in a race if they had a really, really good race. An A-tier asset, the most they could increase before in 2024 was 0.2 million. That's why we saw the likes of Max Verstappen not increasing much in price last year. And also Lando Norris, once he hit 25 million, he did not increase it that much at the end of last season, only by like 1.5-ish million. That was the reason why. Now it looks different. So again, we don't know exactly, but we think that the new max increase and decrease for A tiers is 0.3 million, and the maximum increase/decrease for B tier drivers is 0.6 million. Now there are options in between there that are set. It's not a full range from plus 0.6 to minus 0.6, but I think for now the most important thing that you need to know is that this is the most a driver or a constructor can increase or decrease in price based on a single race weekend, like how much they're going to increase or decrease at the end of the race weekend, which means that the premium assets that previously only increased at the maximum 0.2 now has a maximum of 0.3, and they could decrease a lot in price if they DNF'd, whereas now they're only going to decrease 0.3. So I think these premium assets are going to grow slightly faster and not drop off as fast if they had bad performances. And similarly, or sort of oppositely, I suppose, the B tiers, or the budget drivers, are not going to be increasing 1 million if they have a really good race. The maximum looks to be 0.6, and likewise, if they have a bad race, if they DNF, they could decrease 0.6 million, whereas previously the most they could decrease was 0.2. Very interesting stuff. I think it means that sort of the budget building trope of those budget assets is not entirely dead, but definitely diminished. And this this combined with the change that we saw on the actual F1 Fantasy page, where these increases from 0.3 to 0.6 actually take into account the last 3 races and not just the one race. What this means is still going to a driver, an asset, a constructor is still going to increase or decrease every race, but it's going to be on a sort of average basis over the last 3 races. And this is the thing we don't know exactly yet how it works. What constitutes as a very good or very bad performance over 3 race time. But what this means is that, say if Norris were to win the first 2 races of the season and then DNF in the 3rd race in Japan, he could still increase in price in Japan even with a DNF, just because of his overall performance over those 3 races being positive. So this means that a driver is not likely to decrease in price unless they've had probably 2 bad races out of the last 3. We don't know exactly how this works at the start of the season. We assume that for Australia and China, it's just going to be this first race. So Australia is going to be as swingy as it was previously. If a driver DNFs, they're going to decrease the maximum. You only have 1 race to go off of. And then in China, it's going to be based off the last 2 races, so both Melbourne as well as the Chinese Grand Prix. Very interesting stuff. I think the change to being 3 races is really, really good. We're not going to see those big swings just because your driver got minus 20 points on a DNF. So you're not going to be guaranteed to lose budget if your driver DNFs, which is, you're still going to get those minus 20 points, but at least your budget will not be as harmed as it was previously. All of this stuff that's right here for the different tiers of drivers and how much they can increase and decrease, we'll have to wait and see on what the actual numbers are, how well a driver has to perform to gain the maximum increase, or how badly they have to perform to get the maximum decrease. But for now, we don't know exactly. A video will be out on my channel as soon as we know. That is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to join my mini league, a link to that will be in the description below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure you do so. A lot of videos are going to be coming out in these few days leading up to the deadline on Saturday. I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.